Might paste this list in
Sure.
just somewhere in case I get sick before I get a chance to do the rest of the items.
And don't feel like you have to, but if you're interested in this, we'll use it faster. If you're not, probably a student might work on it in the fall. So
Okay.
that's our timeline. Like, don't feel like you got to do this now.
Okay. Okay.
Also,
Got it.
while we're still talking about this, there's actually the Dale Chaw list that everyone like actually uses right now is one from '95. Like Dale and Chaw re-released. It's like from the same authors. I think Chaw had passed by that point, but like it was work that they had done before that, and so they redid the list in 1995, and that's the most like modern, mostly used one that I can find. I'm trying to go through some of the. It's like I forget the exact like conference name. It's like Computation and Language. Oh, Association for Computational Linguistics has that. That's where I found a lot of the more modern like neural net sort of approaches for readability. And I was gonna see if there had any, if I had just missed any other ones, or if anything new had popped up in the past year. But yeah, I'll still keep looking for that. But mostly like 95 isn't super old. It's not internet age yet, but it's not too old anymore. So
that's a really good point. Yeah, we don't want to flag things like email, I guess. So maybe there's like a small update. I mean, I still do wonder if there's some value in doing a differential check between the list of words that actually people use on forums the most and the ones that are in Dale Chaw to see if they're really obvious things we should add. But maybe it's not really about court forms, because I guess email is really about general knowledge.
Yeah, that's the thing, is I feel like any like common used word thing isn't going to be legal specific. It's going to be general knowledge. So you're right, and we can use things about that, but I don't really know what we get from the forms for the easy side of things. But
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it still might be interesting to do some other research with that, but maybe it's not about directly about our form scoring tool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess this makes sense to be first still. Reword features we might want to turn back on that were disabled for LitCon is the first item. And let me see. I just did a little search for hack. I think anytime we turn something off, we put hack with it.
Yeah.
So the first thing we turned off is, we should add these to the agenda too. Options to reprocess forms when you upload them. Okay, the next thing I see here is, that's the same, normalizing fields. That was an existing hack. I'm not sure if it's actually accurate anymore. Existing hack. I guess it's just those two things.
We turned off other things. Maybe we didn't put hack on those.
Yeah.
My way
You could look at the PRs, the recent PRs just before LitCon.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was about to do. I was like, let's look at the PRs that have been merged in the past 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So, video lucky, add case numbers, that's a thing. Yeah, so transforming people was the other one. And there might be some other ones that are within your bigger PRs, Quentin.
I did try to like spell out everything in the description of the PR at least, so but we could see.
Sorry, I'm realizing I'm just going through.
No, that's no problem at all. Well, some of those bigger ones we probably can't easily undo, even if they did by way of indirectly turn off the feature. But
I think all of the things that we turned off, I think we should at least give them another look, and they will.
Yeah.
I was never thinking, oh, this will just be let's revert that commit after GitCon. I was like, we're turning them off for a reason, so we might as well take a quick look at things before we turn them back on, and see what we can do to improve.
Is the Weaver currently not using field variables to trigger screens? I noticed one interview was just using continue button field names.
it's kind of okay. So I'm writing. It's kind of hard to answer that directly, but let me just finish writing this.
Sure, sorry.
This is really, that's actually literally what I'm just typing. So I think, are you looking at an interview someone else made and you're saying, why do they have that?
They had all continue button fields.
They probably clicked that button that we turned off on every screen.
Oh,
Unless
I
there's a
wonder
bug
why.
somewhere. But that's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to add a continue button field instead of triggering it with a field. And I haven't noticed that error on other interviews that I've worked on. Probably because they don't know what the button does. So they just clicked it and said, maybe it will help me later. Didn't break anything.
you could have a field on an option on a, might be too much work on each field to say, you know, this is going to not always be shown. And so not use the variables that won't always be shown as ones to trigger screens.
Before we go into, so that is true. That is an option. I think we don't need that if you have the ability to rearrange the fields on every screen and people use that option. Because then the first question, you don't want to have something disappear above the button you click, right?
That's true.
You would people should make the first option on the screen the one that's always visible.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good idea. I mean, it kind of ties to our general question about letting people add show if logic, which doesn't actually seem that hard to do. The tricky thing is figuring out this screen versus other screen as the thing that triggers it showing. Maybe explaining how screens are shown or not shown. You need both kinds of logic at once, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. Once we have that, people's logic can be set up more in advance, and then they don't need to have workarounds for that up front.
Okay. All right, are there other ones?
Do you see anything else, Bryce?
It seemed like y'all did a lot of
Yeah.
PRs, but
We did a lot. The only other thing that I'm glancing through some earlier ones, we removed the install on the server option at the very end, but I'm actually okay with just leaving that out entirely.
Oh, that was something that had already been decided we were going to take out, and we just never finished it.
Cool. Okay.
what was it? Sorry. Never mind.
The install, it was like at the very last screen, you have download your stuff, look at it on the screen, or there was a button that would let you install it on the server right then and there, which I think was our attempt to let you look at it really, or like look at it really easily. But Docker Simple is just too slow to let you do that. So,
and I think, like we had said, a better option for just deleting it was to install the playground. That's still an open issue. It still seems like that would be a nice thing to do, because we want people to jump to the playground and start working.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't think we ever need to bring back the install on the whole server for everybody to use option. That wasn't really that helpful. Too bad, because it was a lot of work to build.
Yeah.
That's okay.
We used that knowledge in the dashboard. I think we did.
I think you are right. It was still helpful there.
Not a total loss.
Okay. So quick triage. Do we want to create issues to add any of these features back? First thing, let's see. Like, do any of these things seem like we should keep thinking about whether we're going to use them? And if anyone says yes, we'll say we'll add it.
So reprocessing a form when we upload them, that's like we're planning to do that. We're planning to do a lot of stuff with like the I'm feeling lucky / turbo-ness turbo button. And I feel like that's very heavily involved with that.
Okay. Yeah, good point. Let's see. So I guess I was thinking of two things we should do. One is, should this be high priority to do now? And one is, should we eventually get to it with the right UX? So I think we're saying, yes, this is an eventual add back in. And it isn't urgent? No, right? Is that,
I would say not urgent, yeah.
what about the people feature? Is that something we think?
I've used the
Eventually
people
use-
feature
Okay.
to great benefit.
Yeah, so
but
you have used it. I actually have questions. What do you think? What's your process for using it? Like exactly when you go through and label everything, and then like just what is your process?
I mean, I go through and label things, and then the things that are people, I give them the word name. Sometimes I give other things name if it seems appropriate, and then I select which ones are people and people lists and how many of them there are. I mean, I don't know if I'm missing out on any part of the process that you were curious about.
I think, yeah, sorry, I was trying to make that a little open-ended.
Yeah.
I feel like it was mostly, so maybe I'm just
sometimes it's
maybe
name,
I don't know what I'm asking.
sometimes it's name, sometimes it's address,
Mhm.
you know, that kind of thing. I mean, I wish things in fact would have the ability to add address, you know, if something has address, maybe try and add it as either a person or as an address, because that's
Yeah, is
come
that
up a
another
lot
thing?
recently.
Is that not a thing we actually do? I suppose I thought a lot of the like
I
detect
don't think
people
we
thing
make
was supposed to.
addresses. Well, I don't
It
think
will
we
make an address attached to the
addresses.
person, but it won't be a top level address.
Oh, we don't have top level addresses. Okay.
And I mean, there's also things like month, day, year that we don't handle and stuff like that
Date and stuff. Yeah.
for dates.
I read it.
If there's 3 fields per date, is that basically what you're talking about, Michelle?
Yes. Yeah.
I guess there are forms where there's like bam, 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 but can't you normally just make one field for the date?
I mean, the couple I've seen recently, you couldn't. So
They'll do silly things like on this blank day of blank month in the year 20, and then like just the last 2 years, which is the silliest way to do it, in my opinion. But I guess it's not the worst UX. They could have just done a different date. But I'll have to say, yeah, I've run into the same thing too, especially on the name change forms. They like doing it there.
Okay, because they have an attestation on there, and it's kind of like the way people sign.
Yeah.
Kind of like people want that formal language a little bit for things you're swearing to, because it's part of the ceremony, I guess.
Yeah.
And the people thing, I think I think you're right that new users find it confusing. I've seen that before. I wonder if that's okay, because they generally don't select to use it in those cases, which is just as bad as us not handling it in the first place. And more advanced users, I think, may make use of it, which, you know, I don't know. Something to think about is not just, you know, is the evolution of users.
But it's not just a thing you can use or not use. Like it pops up a question you have to answer that people get confused by, I think.
Right,
So,
but
yeah.
you select, you select, they're not selected by default. So you select them if you want them, and most
That's
people
true.
just don't select them.
It's hard to say. Like, yeah, there's people who click everything if they're not sure what it means. There are people who don't click
That's
anything if
true.
they don't know what it means. Like I know I've seen people where they added every field of the form to an addendum because they saw that question. That made us get rid of the addendum checkbox for things where we didn't think it would be needed.
Do we think that it's worth collecting some metrics about how people are using things?
I don't
I
think
would-
we need to collect metrics.
We'd like to see
were
what
just on a
people are
call.
clicking on versus.
We were just on a call with like maybe 3 of the 10 people who use the Weaver routinely, enough that we would be getting metrics from those people. Like,
Okay.
Feels like a lot of work to collect something. I think we might learn something useful from it, but I think we know most of the users of it. So I tend to agree with.
Okay, just the way
That's
we're
fair.
talking is very general and not like, doesn't feel like we're working off of, like it feels like we're working off of like our guesses, not off of.
Well, the difference is that we have like a focus group every week with people who we can ask.
yeah,
But you're right, it's not the same as a usability test, but
Maybe we just need to write down kind of more concretely there. Because right now we're talking about maybe this and maybe that, but if,
I don't know what
maybe
metrics
they use
or
it,
what.
maybe they use it
you know,
this way, or
resources.
maybe they use it that way. So we don't have a good idea of
Well,
this use case.
yeah.
Better to
I'm
ask
mostly
than
going.
execute.
Yeah, I'm mostly going. We're going from the people we just asked didn't know it existed, and your experience, which is a valid experience, like you are an expert user of this.
Yeah, but I'm not our
that's all we
typical
have.
user, I don't think, right?
Yeah, that's all we have, and I don't think we have a lot of like, yeah, and like the handful of like times that Quentin has watched students. I'm assuming, like the
I don't
usual
generally watch
students.
them, but I mean, we do it live in class.
You've done okay. I was going to
Part
say
of my
done,
heuristics are
yeah.
like, I've tried to explain this to people and I can't explain it in a way that makes sense or that doesn't bog down the class a bunch to get
Mhm.
over that widget. Like that was kind of the first passive usability changes I did. Is like, I can never explain this to people. And then when I did a demo with Gabe and Sarah, who are not trained in any of this stuff, before we did it for the LitCon, they gave me some really concrete feedback on screens they found confusing. So like it was that 2 sets of feedback that I was using for our guesses, but yeah, now we can ask people. I mean, I could say like students, hey, you can get extra credit if you sit down and do a user test with us, but we don't really have the person to do the usability test right now. It's one challenge. We should probably do it.
Yeah, I was going to say I am looking through the list, or like just the actual. I went to find all the things we use for. We automatically detect as people. We like don't ask people if they're people or not. But mostly I realized one of the things I meant to ask Michelle, when you're labeling things, which I don't remember if we're doing this or if this is like the auto detect does this, but would you like choose a new thing like, I don't know, judges or something? Would you do like judges 1 _ name and like with the numbers there? Because that's a thing that I don't know if people do often. And I know a lot of the times our like bad flags are like form _ name. And we're like, oh, is form a person? When it's not like they haven't made it a list of people yet or anything.
I mean, if I have multiples of them, I use 1 and 2. And if I don't, then I don't. I think there was one occasion on which I just used a plural because it just wanted a list of people. Like that,
Okay.
it wanted a
And you
list
never
of
needed
names.
to eventually do it.
Yeah, I didn't need other things from them.
What if we just took off a name? Would that work
Well-
for the use cases you had, Michelle? Feels like that's the most confusing one.
The most confusing.
Leaves the most false positives.
Maybe
Yes.
that might work.
You could still get the name in another way for your situations.
I'd be down with that if we just
Address.
removed name and we stuck with address, we stuck with like name fool and all of the other like longer versions of names that people can use or authors can use for people.
Yeah. Oh, I gotta go. All right.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Fucking
Thanks.
buddy.
Bye.
Where do you think that leaves us? Does that make it seem like it's a more urgent one, or it's better to leave it off for a while?
I don't think it's urgent, at least given like us talking to people and no one actually using it, and Michelle not, even though she uses it, not currently like using it a lot. And I know about it. I maybe would sometimes use it, but I'm also not at the point where I'm like authoring a bunch of forms right now. So yeah, so I would say
like
also low urgency.
It may be more important for us to like have an easier way to add new terms.
Yes. Yeah, I was going to say like adding more of, and that was what I had been sort of trying to move I probably make the conversation too long this morning, but I was trying to move it back towards like, oh, what other things, like essentially like would knowing about all these other features in the Weaver help you out a lot. And I do think moving towards like people's org packages and making that easier to set up and everything is a good move.
And we never let people add custom terms. Like that's the other way to go, is like force the person to say this is a custom thing rather than having it pop up. But maybe even just saying, hey, wait, there's some people missing. Click a button. Do you want to add new terms? Are any of these the ones you want? Are there any other ones you want? But I don't know. That feels like it would work for the power user like Michelle.
Mm-hmm. I know. That was the other thing. I probably should have brought this up when Michelle was back on. But that was the other thing I like did get from the call is at least Emily and sort of Chris, their workflows seem to be much more of, I went through this a long time ago once and like now, and I didn't really understand anything. And now the more I work with the code, I understand it. And it's like, but it's like the next time they go through the Weaver, will they remember all of these specific terms and way we talk about it? Because we're abstracting things from the code. All that to say, I've like the maybe the more things to do with the Weaver would just be to slim part, like the things we've taken out, leave out as much as we can, and just to slim down slim down what we can, and only add something if it's like really useful for someone and it's approachable, and like what doesn't add a bunch of extra complexity.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, thinking about this feature more, like the reprocess stuff, like, okay, that can be a totally separate workflow. You don't need to do it.
Yeah.
This one, again, not a very hard thing to do later. Confusing if you pop it up as a question in line.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay just like basically saying you don't need those features. This one, if you don't do it, there's a ton of rewriting of your interview, which is very mechanical that you have to do manually later.
Yeah.
So maybe it's the most useful thing. That's why but it's just underused.
And that's fair. Yeah. The one I'm thinking leaning towards, if something you brought up when you were making a lot of the name change things of just, we don't have ways to arbitrarily like say, this is a new attribute on a thing. And that's what this comes down to. If like, we can't determine if something is you meant to say, oh, this is just a variable name, or this is an object, likely a person object, and then with an attribute at the end. And so if we come up with a way and we add it to the Weaver to do that, this problem goes away. Like, if people want something to be a person, they'll use whatever syntax we come up with. And if they don't, they won't. We don't even have to guess anymore. We probably should maybe keep guessing for, I don't know if we need, I don't know if it's worth it for like what the deprecation or like changing of behavior looks like for the Weaver, but yeah.
Well, This is like a bigger fundamental
It is,
thing
yeah.
I'm raising now. No, I'm going to say something even more fundamental, which is like,
Okay.
did we want to transform names? Do we have? Should we have? Or should we have let people put in square brackets and dots and because those are all
Dots
valid
are the
field
only thing.
names.
Dots are the only thing you can't do,
Oh,
and
you
I think
can't do dots.
that's probably why I think y'all did. I wasn't here, but I'm assuming
Okay.
that's why y'all did that because dots is a in PDFs you can like arbitrarily nest fields within groups,
Okay.
and so PDF already uses the dot for that. So like, but it doesn't make sense for like, oh, all of these things are attached to this one person because they'd be spread out all over the PDF. And usually it uses it for like this section and all of these questions in this section.
Okay.
But you're right. Like I think dots are the only thing that aren't allowed, and like square brackets are, and a lot of other things are. So yeah.
All right. So no, it sounds like if we can't use dots, like that seems fundamental to all of the use cases we've been talking about, though. So
Yes. Yeah.
we still do need to transform names somehow to make them compatible both ways. And there's nice things about it, like the names are easier to understand.
Mhm.
As long as people are mostly using PDFs. They're harder to understand once you go into docx's again.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it's confusing to have two sets of things.
No.
Wait,
I
do we
agree.
want to?
That's
All right. I guess we can stay on the Zoom even though we're across the hall from each other. Let's just my ears are trying to
Yeah.
hear. It's like, I don't have to be on
I
Zoom, but
think
it's okay. All right. I feel like we do want to make. I think we've kind of settled on we need to do this. We need to add support for other things eventually. And basically, we need a more flexible way to add substitutions of variable names than using than we have now. To see this. Hate Hungarian notation. That's one way to do it. Like we just say underscore list or underscore person.
Yeah.
Don't really like that, but
Yeah, it's just okay, but it's not a bad idea though.
for address and dates, it's natural.
Yeah.
It's not really Hungarian notation. You're not annotating the type. You're just saying that it's descriptive now.
Yeah, and it's technically natural for names because it is a name. It's just name. Unfortunately, happens to be a pretty arbitrary or pretty commonly used word otherwise. So
Okay, so I guess like for date, we need like date, day, date, month, date, year.
yeah, that's exactly what I used and just hand coded some.
Those are easy for us to add.
Yeah.
And doesn't really require the same kind of like, is this what you meant? Like that's always what people mean. An address is always can be an address object. I don't see any circumstance where that wouldn't be true. We should probably just start recognizing those. And person thing's still complicated, but let me just think about this. All right, I guess that's pretty much it for that now. I guess we need to, like, to me, it seems like maybe we can just turn it back on, given who's using the Weaver.
Yeah, I guess that is actually another. My takeaway was like no one's using it, so no one will mind it being off. But yeah, it's another good point. No one's using it, so no one will really notice it turning back on either. So that works, and it at least keeps it in our more discoverable than like we can somehow completely forget about it and we don't notice it for 6 months until someone's rummaging through the code and it's like, hey, wait a second.
Maybe turn off the underscore name. Like that seems like something that wouldn't harm the expert users, really.
Yeah.
Okay. And in docx, we have lots of high quality signals. So that's fine.
Yeah. Docx we could probably iterate on more. I feel like sometimes it gets neglected, but
yeah. Okay. Maybe once we can start doing automatic field recognition on docx's, well, that seems like a cool thing we could try to do. All right. Here's a little one. I think we're good with that. But we'll have turn it on. And then as soon as we can, figure out to stop recognizing name. But that's pretty much it. All right. The rest are just like, they're turned off. And if we figure out we need those features again later, we should look at why we didn't have them on before. PDF stats, I want to just rename to rate my PDF. And kind of that was to your point about understanding who the repo is for. I think it is just for us to host our website.
Yeah. And that's fine. Yeah, no. Thumbs up if we're getting ready for DocAssemble. Like we can change the name. I forget sometimes, and I'll search rate my PDF and our repos, and I'm like, where is it?
This happens to like all of my projects that they start out with a general name, and then there's a brand eventually.
Yeah,
and it makes it hard to find it. Okay, I'll do that today. Oh well, I guess we should talk about the PR before I do that because it doesn't make sense without the merged PR.
I am in progress reviewing the PR. I'm going to try and do one set of comments that's just like, here are things we should definitely do, and then here are all the opinionated things that we're going to have to argue about back and forth with the design. Which we could, if you want to, we essentially address the first ones, and then we'll find some time to I'll go back on all the design and stuff.
All right. Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Let's see. This is kind of related to the naming thing. We kind of already talked through a lot of this, but I still said we should put it on the agenda. Too big to talk about today, probably. The general part.
Interview. What? Yeah, I think
we had a couple conversations about like, should this thing be a DocAssemble package or not? Or do we want to have people kind of push towards other stacks that are simpler to interact with? Like, where's the simplicity trade-off between 2 stacks versus 1 easy stack and 1 hard stack?
Yeah, I think the good thing is that the stacks aren't really different. It's just whether or not we're using DocAssemble's like engine to drive everything. I was about to say, like, I saw you had you had made the team's comment about celery stuff, and I was like,
it's already in DocAssemble, to your point.
Yeah, it's like how close to, and I was going to say I had been doing some stuff from the other direction of like, how simple can we make DocAssemble's like image so we could deploy it on GitHub, and not deploy it on GitHub, but like run it on GitHub and run tests through that. And so I feel like these are just converging at some singular point that is slightly to the left for like if we don't have an interview, and slightly to the right for we do. Mostly saying it might just make sense to it might make sense to have a very stripped down version of DocAssemble. Like, if we're adding all of these things back in, is the avoidance of DocAssemble just to avoid all of the other cruft that it uses, like LaTeX stuff, and like, yeah, I guess that's the base question that I sort of am getting to.
Well, I think the benefit is to have some more maintainable pieces. I did start to wonder, like, I was thinking like one of the big things on my to-do list was, of reportformsonline.org.
Yeah.
And we had a complicated idea for redoing it,
Mhm.
which seemed great, of using a different static engine. I was like, maybe that should just be a Flask endpoint too. We kind of can just learn Flask better and have less things to maintain. But there's so many places where if we wanted someone else to jump on our project, they'll get hung up on Docassemble specific things. And it's hard to deploy. It's slow to build the Docker image.
Yes, yeah.
We're stuck with whatever choices Jonathan makes about deployment and package versions. I feel like I like Docassemble for the places it helps us. And it was a quick, easy way to iterate on things. Like I didn't know Flask well enough to start from scratch. But then once I did, I'm like, this is way more complicated because I'm trying to deal with the CSRF stuff, with the different location of the templates. It might have been faster to read a Flask tutorial because there are a million of those.
Yeah, that's fair.
Than to the amount of Docassemble crossover knowledge I had was smaller than I expected. It would be.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, but if we have a philosophy about it, it might be good to think through, like, when should we prefer to squish things into Docassemble's way of doing things? When should we separate it out? I understand now why Jonathan used Celery, which seems like this weird thing, but now it's like, you want to run anything in a separate process, it's what you do with Flask, because I guess it's because Python is not multi-threaded.
There's a thing that I looked up at one point that I still don't quite understand, but like, because Docassemble uses UWSGI, which is like Web Service Gateway Interface, there's an AWSGI, or like it's like I think it's like ASGI or something, that is asynchronous gateway service, essentially, that like defaults to using actual Python like async stuff.
Well, that's very new. So my guess is that it's because Jonathan built Docassemble on Python too.
For sure. Yeah, it's one of those, I understand why Jonathan hasn't done that, but it's one of those things of, but I'm not I like know it exists. And I on the other hand, I have used some like async Python stuff before. It's not super hard to pick up. But it's mostly the like, I wouldn't be confident saying, oh, we should use that, because that's sort of it feels slightly more towards what we would want to do with this, but I'm not 100% confident to say I know what I'm doing. And I too would be more familiar with just, let's do Flask Celery stuff. And I guess from this perspective, I guess it makes more sense. We should just, maybe it makes more sense to heavily sort of copy exactly what Docassemble is doing with Celery and all of its setup. But
makes sense still as the current best practice, because it was like stuff people started working on like 7 years ago too. So stuff has evolved a little bit, maybe.
Yeah.
I would even be willing to try ASGI if it's seems like a better, simpler interface, because I don't know Celery that well. Like I've used it only in the context of invoking it from a Docassemble background task. And so I've had to understand like what a Celery task is, but I've never had to use Celery's API directly. So I wouldn't feel like I need to lean on my existing Docassemble knowledge of it to do it. What do you think from like your quick look at it? Is it the way things are moving?
I don't think so. That's why I'm not like 100% sure. Sometimes I get caught up on like, is it actually what we want to do? Because most of the time we still do just like, with most requests, you do still just want a single one. And I feel like the ASGI stuff is better for sockets, essentially. Like it's the way of using sockets from Flask. None of the stuff we're really doing is sockets per se. But I don't know, like I think most, from what I understand of most like web stuff, it's still just sort of Ajax. And it would just, even like React stuff, I think is closer to Ajax than sockets, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I kept thinking as I was trying to do this, I was like, this feels like a really simple JavaScript promise, which this is more like how promises work in JavaScript, which I guess that's just the async part.
Yeah, and it might be, I'm not super sure.
There's not going to be as much. Okay, so here's one thing. Flask. does not do ASGI, maybe we just would need to switch something like Fast API, which I've been curious about actually.
I've seen some stuff in Fast API, yeah.
This says Flask does support it. It's not designed to take advantage of the metaphors. And Quart, GitLab, which seems to be kind of like a dying company. But at least it's a big company.
Yeah, Rager, yeah.
So maybe some options are switch to a different framework. We're not too framework heavy, so I don't think that's a huge lift. Like we only have a little bit of code that's using the framework.
Yeah.
Use one that has a similar, switch to one that has a very similar interface. I hear a lot of people talking about Fast API. I don't want to be like all on the hype cycle, but
yeah, that's what I'm like. Yeah, that's the thing is like I'm leaning towards.
Well, in order to use Celery to do what we want to do, which is just to like wait while something happens in the background. That's not very complicated at all. We have to learn Celery, and we have to have a message handler, like either
Redis running and
Redis or RabbitMQ. Seems to be the one people is maybe better for our use than Redis, but maybe we should use Redis because it's in Dockerflow if we're going to do that.
RabbitMQ is also in Dockersymbol, I think. Like I think it does both.
Both for some reason. Okay, we don't know why. That seems so dumb for something so simple, but I don't think there's a good way to do it without that. I guess we could try to use threading directly, but then we're making something that's not as easy to do in the long term. It's like it's not the most well-trodden path, and it's not actually it's gonna have some complications for us. Like it's not like sometimes there's an easy, simple way to do things, which is what most people do. It seems like most people don't do that easy, simple way, and it's gonna lock us into things.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of just like Rate My PDF. We're gonna obviously be like iterating on doing stuff more with, but I'm trying to think random one-off things that we would do in the future. Would they also really, really benefit from using Fast API or just using the async stuff like super great, or like, or would it be better to just like get our Flask, Celery, UWSGI, like Nginx, get a Docker container for that and get it working, and then we can reuse it for whatever we want. Like, which I don't know which is the better approach for us.
Well, let's turn to the only other example, which is a theoretical one. Like, let's say we got an investment to do a general purpose, easy to use e-filing interview.
Yeah.
So obviously we can do that in a Dockersymbol interview. I hear you when you say like it mostly works, or it works like, but maybe some UX polish.
Yeah.
But what are the most complicated things that we're like having to hack around to get it to work in a way that makes sense? Like a lot of them have to do with like slow running background processes, and it's so hacky the way that works in Dockersymbol.
No, yeah, that's fair. And but the thing is like, how does that work? It's one of those like, how does the rest of the web deal with this? Because at the end of the day, it's like everything is.
So they're doing things like React, where the screen stays the same, but you do I always want to say Ajax because that's how you would pronounce it in Dutch, and that's the Amsterdam's team. Ajax request, and then the backend gives you the response.
Yes, yeah.
So, and it looks like that's the same approach people would do in Python with Fast API as the current hotness. Or people have a Celery task where, again, it's invoked asynchronously, but it's not like you click a next button and then wait for the screen, right? Like it's you click a button, you show progress with JavaScript Ajax query, and which Dockersymbol actually really does work that way anyway. It's just that there's a little bit less
we're not like
control
defining
over where the spinner appears, and it
looks
looks like it's loading a whole new page even when it's not.
Yes, okay, I see what you mean.
It's an SPA.
So that's fair, and I guess
I feel like we're in the starter tutorial of any of these packages. There's a pretty low switching cost right now.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
Only thing is, does Fast API also use Jinja templates? You can use any one you like, and Jinja is a common choice. Okay, that to me feels
Oh, Fast APIs. I didn't know it was Tiangolo. That's the
that
same.
it was what?
The it's like
Oh,
that one developer. That's the same developer I use the Nginx UWSGI Flask Docker container from.
that's funny. So that's the
Apparently,
same person
they do everything.
who's huh.
I probably just like core lead maintainer on it.
Oh yeah, and it's a single developer.
Yeah. It's probably worth a shot. You're right. Like we have like granted we know okay, we don't have like a working thing in Celery, but like we know what it would take to get it to work in Celery, and that's all in the Docassemble code.
Mm-hmm.
And so we could like it might be worth it. You're right to just try it in Fast API, and then we'd have two concrete things to like look at and compare. Like, okay, does one look like it will scale a lot better for just making a lot of these other really smaller things? Like, because I think that's what we're going to end up doing. I don't think we're going to have a giant like the large, like you said, the largest thing we're going to have is the e-filing thing, which is a bit more, but it's not like a huge endpoint. So
I mean, one thing, we're gonna have a lot of web forms in an e-filing interview, so like that's switches back to like saying, oh well, maybe Docassemble, but still, like I feel like
yeah,
once you get away from wanting it to be primarily a linear wizard,
mm-hmm.
the value of all the things that come along with Docassemble, fragility, the fact like different ways you can crash it,
Thumbs up. Yeah,
having to deal with background tasks.
yes, yeah.
This is kind of implying this is a quick search, but it looks like people still do use Celery and RabbitMQ with Fast API.
Interesting. Well, I guess you have to, because at the end of the day, it will be doing things in other processes. It's probably not using Python's threading stuff. Probably, maybe. I don't know.
This is comparing it to using async IO, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it looks like it's a thing that there's value to do, even if you're using Fast API and async. In this case, we're talking about we have this API query. We want it to finish up. Maybe that's enough. Like that's such a small. That tends to be like our pattern. So I don't know if the delta between that and Celery, like where you would switch. Just don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see what ChatGPT says. It's been kind of fun to write with ChatGPT. I said this last week, but it makes it a lot easier to answer quick questions. You don't have to like skim through a bunch of source documentation to get an answer. And it's like an instant version of Stack Overflow in terms of the quality of responses. And like, they're not always 100% accurate, but you get it back right away. Okay, so what would our question be? This is kind of what we're thinking, right? This is what we mostly have to deal with. IO bound tasks.
I guess that's the way to think about it. It's not really an IO bound task, because we're doing a bunch of stuff with it. But I
Okay.
guess
Yeah.
from the you're
From the
right, from the
viewpoint of-
perspective of the user, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to figure out the distinction between.
Well, actually, no.
Large data set.
That is what we're doing, because that's the thing, is like this is actually using IO bound task and the viewpoint of like actual speed ups, because because like Python's threading stuff, it is only going to be faster if you're using or the async stuff's only going to be faster if like you have a lot of processes that are waiting on, like literally just waiting on the CPU for some response from the kernel. Like that's what it means for IO, or that's what ChatGPT I think is trying to say when it means IO bound.
Well, they give the
But ours-
examples: web requests, database queries, or other tasks. This says the main advantage of Celery is about being able to distribute the workload across multiple machines or multiple processes, which if we have a lot of, maybe we want to take advantage of the fact we have multiple CPUs on an individual server, right? Maybe then we do want to use Celery. But actually the processing, we're running form fixer locally, yeah. But we're not doing passive pi, that's a slow one. And we're not doing the vectorization locally anymore. That was another memory bound one.
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily spinning up new workers to handle this. It's just like if we have a lot of load. And we could just use round robin DNS, honestly. Like, well, maybe that's not enough. I don't know how to handle if someone is in the middle of the process and they try to come back to it. But it seems generally like we could use pretty, we don't really need to load balance the workload across multiple machines.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
Task retries, prioritization, or monitoring. That's for like super slow. Like basically we're talking about 30-second delay. And you don't want the thing to time out up to 2 or 3 minutes, which is a long time, but maybe we need to separate some of the level of the tasks that we get, insights we get back to. Letting people see the screen where they see the stats and like, hey, we're getting the stats now.
That's not a bad idea, yeah. That might be the best way to set it up, and then have an extremely quick, not even like, we don't even need to spin up anything, just in Flask response of, here's some stuff about your form. And if that returns within 0.5 seconds, then it doesn't matter if we do a little bit of extra duplicate work to like, then a few seconds later show all the other detailed stuff, which we would still
probably
need.
Just like the title, and we could get the number of fields and stuff like that too, I guess, but I don't know if that's helpful until we have a score. But some of the suggestions we could show, like, hey, while you wait, here's some things that improve most forms.
Yeah, general suggestions. That's good, but I thought that might be separate from the question we're trying to answer, I think. Oh, did you have a thing at 12:30?
No, I just wanted to be able to take a break at some point before, well, enough time to get lunch and then be ready for classic 1. 2.
Okay, yeah, same.
That's all. Are we kind of saying we should try Fast API, or do we not think there's enough of a reason? And only reason is if we're going to use async IO. So I guess that's the related question. Does it seem like async IO would get us most of what we need from this very quick overview? And if so, is it worth switching to a more, I mean, I hear people rag on Fast API or on Flask a lot, and people seem to be excited about Fast API, but I know there's fads.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I feel like I want to try to maybe read up a bit more about some of the differences between all of them.
2010.
Huh.
Django is another option. Yeah, another option, but like I
Yeah.
don't find. I feel like Django is making so many choices for you. Like I would find myself fighting the framework more than I.
Agreed.
Like
I think a lot of our stuff is better served by something really light like Flask. And if Fast API is that, but it can handle better, it can handle things that tasks that take like maybe 20 seconds better, then that would be the way to go, I think. There's this really long section in the Fast API tutorial about like concurrency and async and stuff that I kind of want to read through a bit more.
Okay.
And they eventually get to like, oh, which one do you actually want, or like what's the actual difference between concurrency and parallelness, and like what Fast API is focusing on. I think that I have a feeling might be useful, but I'm not 100% sure.
Most of the execution time taken by war instead of waiting. This kind of does. They're saying this is parallelism is better for this scenario. We just have a big job to be that needs to get finished.
Yeah. And there's a deployment section too that I might. Oh, that's actually pretty sparse.
How to achieve parallelism in production. Really seem like it's explaining it actually. That's interesting. They have some template generation, just like we're doing with the Weaver. I mean, this is really attractive too. The fact that it's generally faster than Flask.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I kind of wonder if that should be our framework of choice rather than trying to generate static HTML for the Core Forms Online. It means one more always on container, I guess.
Yeah, honestly, I'd be able. It is an auto. It
Feels
doesn't
easier
always
to
have
maintain.
container.
Just feels easier for us to maintain it.
Yeah,
I was
it would
not
be.
looking forward to learning a whole new thing, even though I originally put us on that path. But that was a year ago.
Yeah,
We've never finished it. So
yeah, exactly. Like this whole time I've been like, I need to get back to the Gatsby stuff, and then I look at it and I'm like, why is this so hard? It's a lot. It is really complicated, and I'm questioning how much this small group of people can maintain long term.
all right. We might, it basically feels to me like we might be able to get away without Celery for quite a while. Because we're really talking about individual small requests. But maybe we would want to add the complexity of Celery later. I mean, I like that we don't have to do it right away. Doesn't feel like we really have that option with Flask, do we?
We just have to write everything ourselves in Flask. So anytime we change, there's probably a lot more overhead there. Whereas it looks like this one might be as simple as a few configs and like adding some code, or like adding some spinning things. I don't know.
All right. Well, let's come up with a plan for thinking about this more. It doesn't need to be decided now. The only thing is like the two feedback we got the most for the Rate My PDF website now, where it times out.
Yep.
It does. And that it's hard to read and understand it. And I feel like we kind of tackled, I'm sure I'll get more opinionated feedback about the appearance I made, but I feel like it's better.
Yes, we have a path forward to making it look better. We've done that before, and we're doing it now. For this
is the new thing we have to do, which seems like fundamental.
Yeah.
And we have this issue in other areas too, right? Like it's not like we can solve it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a basic robustness thing for our code that we're not always doing. We're not doing it with generating lots of attachments at once either. That's the other place.
Yeah.
We need to get that fixed too.
Yep. How much do you think it would take to try to do fast API for bad aesthetic version of Rate My PDF? Like essentially what we had, where it was just a upload PDF field on a screen. You click a button and then as rawest of an output dump as you can on the next screen, because that lets us focus on the back end and figure out, okay, what does it actually look like to then take the async stuff and wait on it for that? Like, does it still time out? I don't know. That's the thing is I need to look more, because it's like there's extra timeout. There's extra things we'll still need to do in JavaScript to avoid some of the actual timeout screens, and then I still don't know how those avoid timing out in AJAX requests, because AJAX requests still time out because they're just HTTP. But that's just stuff I don't quite understand. But mostly if we can get that there and we're like, hey, with this little tiny prototype, we have solved our timeout problem. Then I think if depending on how easy it was to do that, then we'd have a good, let's try and get this deployed and deployable in its current state, like without really changing anything from the front end side of things.
Well, I don't think that this front end would be hard to get because it's just Jinja templates.
Yeah.
So I think we don't have to have a less.
That's fair.
We don't really have to undo that.
That's fair.
I would kind of budget myself like 8 hours probably to learn the new framework.
Okay.
And I don't know that it would be much slower than learning Celery enough to get that part working. So I could see a lot of learning there too.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
But it would be some delta, right? Because there's redoing the things that we already have working in Flask. So I'd probably say it would add like 2 to 3 hours of the time that would have to be extra work compared to just getting Celery working to me. I don't know. What do you think? What would be your best guess for the timing?
I think if it's not touching front end at all, 8 hours, maybe, depending on if there's I'd say 8 to 1 or 2 days of just working on that. Depending on if 2 days, if it's like all of a sudden something comes up and it's like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. But if everything goes as the tutorial says, then probably 8 hours would be good enough for it.
Which I think we're doing something straightforward enough that it could. It's like one slow query, one slow function call we're doing. Wait for that, get back the results. Like we should be able to find that pattern in a tutorial level code to work from, probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, seductive to start over with something, but it feels like this is a good one to try it on, to be honest. I just keep coming back to that too, because it's such a small code base. And Fast API is close enough to what we're doing. It's still Python. We don't have to redo anything substantive. It's just the front end code, basically, we're talking about. Or not.
Yeah.
Well, not just the front end, but it's the interface to our API is all we're really worrying about.
Mhm.
I write this down. Down to
Yeah, I think that's the right response of like, yeah, it does. I don't think it will merge all the way to what DocAssemble's doing, but it is one of those like we just have different priorities.
okay. I think the thing we definitely don't want to do is try to maintain two versions of things. Like make it work on DocAssembly without. I don't. That's
No,
like
yeah.
we already decided that.
Yes,
So
yeah.
maybe like if we just say like it's only going to be DocAssembly, but the reason we made it separately deployable was for a good reason. We also didn't want people to crash our server because of.
Yeah, we don't want people to crash the dev server, but I don't think we had considered just like running DocAssemble, but just with this on it, which was the thing that seems a bit overhead wise, like a bit bigger than what we actually need. And so that's why I had been leaning towards like, or like one of the things I've been doing is like, oh, how lean can you make DocAssemble? Because you can make it a lot smaller. There's so much stuff that we don't even ever use, and but I think that's a different thing. I think
Yeah,
you're
actually,
right. We're, you know,
it's an interesting point. Like, actually, I think maybe Jonathan should separate out the LaTeX stuff. That's something probably.
it's a thing he's been asked about before, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't want to maintain two Docker containers."
Okay.
That's like, which makes sense. Like he's if
For
for
house
something for
deployment.
him, but it's something that like we could consider. Like we maintain one of them. It's not super hard, and it makes a lot of other stuff like much smaller and much more reliable and less likely to explode light sail.
I guess some of it probably doesn't run in the background, but yeah. Smaller is good though, and quicker to start up and install.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Do we want to do this? This is going to, I guess we'll talk about it on between 3 and 4, I guess. Take that off. Doesn't really need to be in this call.
Yeah, that's right.
Is this where we want to go? I think. I mean, I probably can just work on doing more of the suggestions. We need those back in, right? My PDF
Mm-hmm.
before we decide if you want to do some reading first.
Yeah, I was gonna say I kind of do want to do a little bit of reading, and I do want to see just see how well it would actually work for our stuff. Like I have a feeling we would lean. Like you're right. I guess a lot of the things that Celery itself only does is for like multi-server stuff, which might be a reason why DocAssemble uses it, because it has so many of these like big multi-sale or like multi-server setup stuff that is just not our use case.
Mhm.
So if we could, yeah, maybe do a bit of both, and maybe I can. If I would say if I'm doing a bit of this reading, I could start doing this, but I've also been trying to focus on the e-filing stuff. So
Yeah, I was thinking I could just keep staying on this. It's, switching gears can be tricky. I've gotten
Yeah.
into it again, so I don't mind doing this. Learning doesn't seem too bad to me.
Mhm.
But
yeah, if you want to,
if we-
try and do learning a bit more, then that would work.
if you want to, maybe that means I should just keep in mind the caveats we already discussed.
Mhm.
Look at my week. It's not too bad. I mean, I don't have like 8 hours any given day to just work, but yeah, I could probably get something beyond the Hello World up by Friday, I would think, looking at
That's
what my
fair.
day's like. Friday's pretty open, actually.
Okay. Yeah, and I can definitely have read through some of that stuff by that point too, and that's good.
I
We
won't
don't
work
have
on
to
it today,
fix things.
probably. I might start
No,
some stuff
yeah.
tomorrow. Or maybe I will. Maybe I'll start some stuff today just to see if I can.
Okay.
All right. So are we? Oh, I mean, I guess I'm still, this is kind of assuming we're just going to do we're going to try Fast API, which is kind of what we're trying to decide. If we did want to try it.
I
Do we
think
think
that's the thing, is just to try it. Like you said, like we're at a point where it's not like we can get feature parity very easily, and because a lot of the heavy lifting of the code is already in a different Python package, so like we could get feature parity real easily, and so I think it's just worth it to try it.
And I'm guessing we don't have to add async support to form fixer. We just make our call to form fixer async in a wrapper function.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess that's just how it works. If we can do it with the API call, it would be the same. Or a REST API call. All right. So this week I will just try it. But now I'm thinking, I don't know if you can keep reading if you want, but maybe it's going to be learning by doing.
It'll probably be a bit of both. Yeah.
So maybe we don't have to give you that new thing for your to-do list.
That's fine. I mean, I'll probably just read it anyway because I'm curious. But yeah, that's fair.
Maybe something to keep looking into is revisiting our idea about courtformsonline.org and whether Fast API could work for that, and how we would handle the big thing was like we wanted to let people have some place to update the content easily, which seems kind of dumb now since we've had no new forms go live, and actually our current workflow has been a blocker for that. But it's been like maybe 3 or 4 forms that maybe could have gone live if we had a better workflow for getting to them, but not so many that we need a whole complicated new framework to do it.
Yeah, it's mostly like the new frame. The new framework lets us do the same thing, whereas Fast API Flask stuff would just be, like you said, it needs a always running thing for.
Yeah. well. And which is fair that maybe we don't want to do that if we're, we're saying it's going to cost us $20 a month to run the website instead of $3, I guess.
Free,
Static
right?
files. We're not using,
We're not
are we
using-
using, I believe we're using S3.
Okay. Sorry, I thought we were.
So $3 is probably more than it actually costs because we don't have that many visitors a month.
That's right. Okay.
50 cents, let's say.
Sure, yeah.
But
I thought-
it shouldn't actually cost us $20. We should be able to run it in a $5 bucket probably.
Yeah, for sure. So that's fair, and that's probably not too much of a difference.
It's more maintenance. We have to do.
And we should be able to. The thing is, if we're doing this all in Flask or Fast API, we should just be able to read whatever we have. Like we can set it up such that whatever we want to keep using, we can. And I think like because there were two parts. There were two parts to the static website side. There was we go. I'm blanking on the word. But there was the Gatsby side, and then there was the like serverless content side.
Mm-hmm. The
Which-
serverless content part we could probably still keep if we want to, if we think that's overhead is worth it.
Yeah, I think that was was the thing that had been blocking us was just the idea of preventing, not preventing. But yeah, like I was the thing that had been blocking it was just the idea of like, oh, it's this spreadsheet and no one has access to the spreadsheet, and it's really confusing to try and do all those things.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
we could keep the spreadsheet and just have that be integrated live with whatever we do too. That's another option.
Yeah, we can do either. As long
Start.
as change, and I think we could probably that actually would technically be able to do the same with Gatsby. It's just whatever we'd have to change if we're changing the like spreadsheet to something else. Then we'd probably have to change the front end as well.
I'm just doing a little poking around on the Fast API website, and it looks like there's a free deployment option right now, which, VC money's dried up already in a lot of instances. So maybe it will stay free for a while if it hasn't died yet.
Free how?
Something called Data, DETA. I'm assuming you still say it, Data. It looks like you can deploy. There's a free tier, and I looked on the pricing page, and they basically said, if you're planning to use 1 million plus requests a month, get in touch. But basically, that's kind of their limit.
Okay.
So we wouldn't even need to worry about sysadmin stuff for maintaining a server, perhaps.
Yeah, that's fair. Wait, no, there's an announcement. There's an announcement on their front page.
Oh, it's not on their pricing page yet? That's on there. Okay.
Delta Cloud is there. I don't know. It's just something about like an announcement. We had to rethink the free cloud. And so I'm trying to figure out what that actually means because it's vague.
Is it on data.space?
Yes. Maybe it does mean something. Maybe it is what you're looking at though. They just phrased it weird such that like, oh, we needed to rethink the free cloud. And I'm like, that seems like you're making it not free.
I don't see that, but maybe point me to the.
I sent you straight to the blog post thing.
Oh,
that is.
okay. Just didn't have to check them. I see it now.
But clicking the link through from Fast API brings you to like the announcement page.
Got it. Okay, so Data Cloud is gone. They replaced it with Data Space. It looks like they have a database thing, which maybe would be better to integrate with than what were we looking at? I forget.
Okay, maybe it is just the same thing.
Well, we might have some like migration pain with this since it seems to be changing around. So that's something to keep in mind. But doing a plain old Flask on a container we sysadmin is not that bad. Probably.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, I was just thinking about pricing. It feels like this might get us for a year or two, even if they change the way they do things. And maybe we
Yeah.
just try to avoid integrating too much with their site-specific features.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Well, they're going to make money by letting you sell your apps. All right, I don't know. You might learn more about things that you like or don't like about Fast API. Trying to think about that use case. Anyway, that was where we were starting. So
That's fair. Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if the pricing part's the most important part, but
Yeah.
maybe it's worth thinking a little bit about how deployment would look and where we would store data. If we would still try to use the same service, I can't even remember the name of, to house the data itself,
Mm-hmm.
or if we'd be better off maybe just a bunch of markdown files with version control, because it's not that many things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I guess loading those live is not great, unless you're doing it static. Trying to read a markdown file every time that you load a page is not great versus a real database.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's lots of very performant database-driven web pages. WordPress runs like 80% of the web.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, what are we right to try to go with? I forget what that's called. It did seem really attractive last year. We didn't do anything with it. So
Yeah. Yeah, we never did anything with it. Contentful is what it's called. I eventually found it.
Contentful, that's right.
Contentful. So yeah, it's one of those things. I don't think we'll be at the point where whatever we do, if we can make it easy for us, that is good. I think Contentful is good for like you want to have a ton of different people all writing different things, and I just don't think we're quite at that point.
Well, I am seeing some like easy. There's definitely Python integrations with Contentful.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. All right. Okay. I'm dying here. I got to get off and start doing the rest of ready for our 2 o'clock. So